How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com. Hey, guess what? It's .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're back again, coming up on NDC London. I won't be there. No. You'll be there, though, right?
I will, yeah.
Yep.
And actually, there's a couple of folks there that are good run-as guests, so I'm going to record some run-as while I'm there.
That'd be really cool.
It'll be fun. And I've been custom tailoring. I do a talk on energy generation, which is based on the Geek Outs, but I've been tailoring it to the country I'm in.
Nice.
So I've done a few of them now. So I have been studying UK power generation.
Wow. How cool is that?
The originators of coal. You know, the first coal power plant.
The originators of coal are dinosaurs, my friend.
Well, actually algae, but the first coal power plants were in England. And
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it was called the Savior of the Forests.
Isn't that ironic?
Because everybody was burning wood.
Now it's the destroyer of the forest.
Destroyer of all things, yes.
All right. Well, let's start things off right with a little thing we call Better Know Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, man. What do you got?
You're into amateur radio and stuff. Like you got into that when you were a kid, right?
I've done, yeah. Have I built my own radio? Yes, I built my own radio. Do I currently have a giant mast antenna in the backyard? No, because I like being married.
That's funny. I got into CB radio, when I was a kid.
There you go.
And that was a lot of fun. But anyway, there's this app called radio.garden, and that's a kind of a shortcut, HTTP. It's not HTTPS, HTTP radio.garden. And it basically is a globe, and you can see all of the different radio stations all over the world. And when you click on one, you listen to it. It is unbelievably a time vampire.
Interesting. So we're just talking about commercial radio, like FM. Wow.
Right. But who wants to listen to, North American radio? I want to go see what they're talking about in Istanbul, So
that's amazing.
I'm sure you're going to love that.
That's incredibly distracting. You could waste a ton of time on that one.
While you should be writing your book on the history
I should be writing a book, but I'm listening to Radio Free Europe.
So cool, though. Well, anyway, that's what I got.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I'm sorry for encouraging you to waste your time, but if you're going to waste your time, you might as well get some global perspective. So that's
a good one. Yeah, really interesting. And of course, I'm sure there's translation problems. I'm not going to be able to listen to Radio Azerbaijan, although I probably should.
But you know what's cool? You could just pull up a Google Translate or something like that, have it listen to your speaker, and it will translate for you.
Yeah, I wonder if I could keep up. That would be interesting.
That would be interesting.
The idea that we'd even presume that would be possible, but I guess it is.
Or, in honor of Vishwas, maybe we should be using Azure Cognitive Services to translate.
Yeah, the real-time part makes me nervous, but I guess we could try.
That's pretty good. The Google stuff keeps up pretty well.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, so who's talking to us, Richard?
I grabbed a comment of show 1807, the one we did back in August of 2022, and we talked to Kartik. Let me tackle that last name. Kanakasabisan. Yes. Kanavisan? Sorry, Kartik, I mashed up your last name. Brilliant guy. He was one of our first Power Platform conversations. He never said fusion development in that show, but certainly he was talking about this idea of the mixture of domain experts working on workflow and developing UIs and traditional .NET developers being able to contribute with back-end pieces and even some customization and so forth. And it's, phenomenal conversation. And Juan Pablo Tonico had this comment. He says, the Power Platform is very easy to use and is impressive at how fast it's evolving, which I think is a really important part. I mean, we did that show in August, and so much has changed even now, just a few months later. Having said that, one of the things that stopped us from fully adopting it was the perceived lack of server-side logic at a low-code level. And I think that's an interesting thing here. It's like you can write all kinds of server-side logic if you're just working in C#, create some APIs and make them available to them. But from a low-code perspective, it's a little trickier. Mm-hmm. As far as we understood, once a connection is added to a Power App, the user using the app would either have user permissions into the connected resource or would implicitly be using access level of the credentials used when adding the connection. In the latter case, even if the Power Apps only use a subset of operations at the source, the end user of the Power App could, in theory, execute other operations on the source that's provided. Mm-hmm. Our understanding is this is due to the fact that Power Apps logic run client side, and that anything that would typically be enforced on the server side, such as validation rules, security enforcement specific to users or roles on a typical web app, would have to be enforced by the system that the connector is connecting to, which would be like a third-party API or perhaps a database. Mm-hmm. So it looks like the way to accomplish that level of control is to create custom APIs in code that then in turn would be talking to the sources. So you're creating a middle layer yourself. That makes it a little harder to implement the apps. There's nothing wrong with that model, but it's important that you're going to have to work through these things. Now, I'm sure this has evolved since Juan wrote this back in August, but if I'm an architect looking at Power Apps and not falling for the just let them do their thing over in the corner, but to actually make it part of the workflow of how we build software and so forth. Like, this is InfoSec. These are basic rules we need to do. And if we've got to implement APIs to be sure of our security and access rules for different bits of data, so do it. Building those API layers is not that tough and well worth your time. And Juan Pablo, thank you so much for your comment. And a copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the social medias. We publish every show on Facebook. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By. And
definitely follow us on Mastodon. He's at Rich Campbell at Mastodon Social. And I'm at Carl Franklin at Tech Hub Social. Send us a toot.
That's not going to be funny someday, right? Like,
yeah, at some point I'll have to make up a real joke. But
I'm sorry. I think it may have been funny since I was 10 years old, so I may not be able to get over it. Like,
send us a toot. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, the last thing Mastodon wants to hear from its Italian dentist, right? Tuscaloosa.
Oh, please. or that Greek jeans repairman, Euripides?
Euripides, Eubiades.
Tuscaloosa. All right.
Welcome to Dad Jokes Central. All right. So Vishwas is here again. And I think Vishwas, you said you've done this show 10 times before, but I don't know. Let me introduce you formally.
Is it the free sub level yet?
Yeah. Vishwas Lele serves as CTO at Applied Information Sciences Incorporated. Mr. Lele is responsible for assisting organizations in envisioning, designing, and implementing enterprise solutions related to cloud and mobility. Vishwas brings close to 25 years of experience, probably more by now, and thought leadership to his position, and has been with AIS for over 20 years. A noted industry speaker and author, Vishwas serves as the Microsoft Regional Director for Washington, D.C., and is currently a Microsoft Azure MVP, and also a multi-guest on .NET
episode.
Rocks.
This is his 13th episode.
Oh my gosh.
Tell him what he's won.
Vishwas, I remember a behind the scenes thing that happened when we first started talking on .NET Rocks. Do you remember what I'm going to say? Yeah, you are. I mean, Richard was talking to you and I was fiddling with a microphone that wasn't staying put, and it just like slid down and nailed my finger or something. Like, it just like whacked me. And you were talking to Richard and I just let out a big old F-bomb. And then there was total silence. And if we had video of you, I'm sure you would have been bug-eyed and like, what? What did I say?
What did I do?
Yeah. Well, anyway, welcome back.
It wasn't you. I knew it wasn't you.
Wasn't you.
I don't know how you would know that.
I'm still apologizing for that.
No.
Well, welcome back again, Vishwas. And I can't say how many times I've said the same thing to you, which was, bring me the case study, please. Like, when it comes, you were often working on relatively leading edge technologies, but generally when we're having a conversation about a show, it's, I really need an example here because there's lots of people hand waving about how great something is. And I'm thinking back to like 2009 when every Azure show I did was a hand wavy one. Right. And you pinged me about an Azure show. I was like, I just need a case study, man. I need a real project that's deployed. He goes, well, I got one of those. Of course you do. Yeah. I count on you to have a real production apps really doing the thing and giving us that insight. It's like, here's what's hard. Here's what's easy.
So 10 minutes in, we're finally going to let him talk.
Yeah. No, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me back. And you don't have to apologize, Carl. You've explained this to me multiple times. So thank you. And Richard, I do remember your comment back in 2009. Talk about a real world case study. We got started with Azure really early. Can't say that there was some big vision that, I knew this was going to be big or anything like that.
Yeah.
It just fell into a customer project, started working on it. And, there's some lessons that we talked about in that show.
Yeah. Very compelling. Absolutely.
This word fusion is relatively new, isn't it? I mean, maybe going back to January last year that Microsoft's been using this word?
I think the word fusion has been around for maybe longer than 2 years. And, of course, different people have used different terms. There is this term called democratized delivery that people have used. I think Gartner has used that term. But you're right. The term fusion development maybe has been in vogue for the last 2-3 years with the advent of low-code, no-code platforms that you talked about in the 2 previous shows. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it also bringing together, I guess they call them citizen developers with professional developers with infrastructure people. And so it's the fusion of working those personas together, isn't it?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I tend to use the term business technologist.
I like that.
And a professional technologist, right? I like to tend to use this term. And the idea, as you said, is to bring people with cross-cutting experiences. And there's a very important thing happening here. Many of your listeners would probably listen to Fusion Team and say, hey, anytime we do a sprint planning and when we are working on these agile projects, we always have a business team member participating in our teams, right?
Yeah. Domain expert.
A domain expert. And with most teams who cared about what software was being built, was it meeting the expectations? Ultimately, somebody's paying for that software. Are we meeting those objectives? All the teams who cared about that, we always had a domain expert or a business user. And this is taking that paradigm to the next level because you had this domain expert there, but their influence on everyday decisions was somewhat limited, right? They would prioritize things. They would say this is important. The good ones anyways got involved more deeply about, how are you thinking about this and what is the business process flow? But they were still at the periphery of the whole development process. Fusion development changes that and sort of says, okay, you just don't have one domain expert. Let's try to move this application development activity to a model where a team is comprised of maybe some professional technologists, some business technologists, and they're using tools that you talked about in the previous shows, low-code, no-code tools to sort of jointly work on creating these kinds of applications. And there's a fancy way to say that, which is, you're trying to move, ultimately the goal is you're trying to move the decision-making closer and closer to the customer. So if you involve these business technologists who know the business, have a flair for technology, if they are involved, not just in sort of supervising these teams, but actually rolling up the sleeves and coding some of that, you're bringing those decisions closer to the customer, and that's where you want your decision-making to be. So to me, that's sort of the sense of what Fusion Team is about. And of course, it takes a lot for this to happen. It just does not happen in vacuum.
But I mean, we're almost talking about one of the people that's going to use this application is part of the team that's building it then.
That's right.
And that's pretty powerful. Like obviously not everyone who's going to use the app is going to contribute to it that way. You typically want, there's a certain personality I can immediately envision that would be great at this. But that level, it's not just writing docs or criticizing forms. It's making the forms. It
is making the forms. That's right. No, not all users are going to be, I think there's an interesting way to think about it. We have in any given organization content users, but a percentage of them are becoming content developers as well, right? Yeah. And allow me to go sideways just for a second. I had a very interesting conversation. I was teaching a PowerApps class, and there was this gentleman in the back of the class, and I went over to him and said, did he get what he wanted out of the class? And had a good conversation with him. This gentleman had worked for Air Force, had to leave Air Force for some reason. Because he had an accounting degree, ended up working for the accounting department of an energy company here in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And he found that, and he had no computer science background, no programming background. He found that he was doing quite a few repetitive tasks and went to the IT department, see if they could help him because the tasks were becoming repetitive and mundane and hard to complete. And of course, the IT department was busy with other things and did not have enough cycles to help this one person in the accounting department with some automation.
Yeah.
So he picked up PowerApps and started building these applications. And he walked me through a collection of applications. He's become well known within his department for solving other people's problem and automating things. And when he showed me the application, Richard and Carl, the applications were non-trivial, right? Multi-screen applications with multiple widgets on each application. And, to complete some task, you had to go through 4 or 5 or 10 screens. And he was using an iPad to show me all those applications. Of course, PowerApps renders in different form factors. He had an iPad. And applications looked pretty sophisticated. And he said, I could never imagine that I would one day be building these applications. I have no computer background, no technology background, really. And it really opened my eyes. This was 5 or 6 years ago. This opened my eyes that I would be hard-pressed to build these kinds of applications in the amount of time that he had built.
Right.
Yeah.
So imagine taking somebody like him, and there are many such people within an organization. It's becoming harder and harder to hire CS degree holders and get them into the company.
Right.
It is much easier to hire people who have an aptitude and attitude for learning these kinds of things, whatever degree or no degree for that matter, and sort of bring them into the mix, have them work in jobs where they're interacting with the customers, they understand the business, and then bringing them, if they have a flair for technology, bringing them. So we're doing two things at once. We're solving this chronic shortage of developers that every team says.
Right.
And then we are building applications that are far closer to the customers that we are building them for. So that's sort of the mental model of a fusion team.
It seems like it would save a lot of time in the sense that this is a person that would normally consume these forms. So they're going to be pretty clear on, based on the personality, of course, pretty clear on what needs to be on that form. Like I've gotten my apps to that point by sitting close with those folks, right? I mean, that's your sort of classic agile development process where the stakeholders right there with me and we're going back and forth to try and make sure all the things on that. But if that stakeholder was building that form, that just seems like the most efficient way to get that done.
In the past, we would use Cucumber. They would use Cucumber to describe something, right? Which is a tool for describing logic and everything. Or you'd give them a C# module that just has rules, and teach them how to do basic logic flow, right? But it seems like we can throw those old rotten cucumbers away.
Yeah, I was thinking, tools like Scratch too, like just the kind of UX, so that they can build a visualization, but then you still have to transcribe that. I mean, in some ways, you're doing that visualization, you're just doing in PowerApps, so it's actually the code. Right.
And the tooling is one aspect of it, as you pointed out. I really think then this is my experience, and I would like to maybe later on in the show give you one example of something that has been in production working in this model. Talk about that in a moment. But there are, beyond the technology, there are a lot of, Carl, you talked about, hey, showing me a Figma and then generating an app. I think you talked about that.
Yep.
I mean, those are all cool things, and they will continue to improve on those capabilities.
You still have to be technical to use it.
Yes. and you pointed out in that show, I was listening to and chuckling that you pointed out about, responsive nature of what gets generated and all.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right?
I.e. none.
None.
Absolute. Everything's absolute, yeah.
So, my experience has been that, the tools will continue to get better, but unless you have the IT folks like myself, folks like yourself, sort of have to think about this approach slightly differently.
Right.
The professional developers are going to be absolutely needed, right? You take a large business and they have, let's just take insurance, for example, they have policy systems, sales systems, they have claim system, which are highly complex applications, right? You're not going to just take a Fusion team and start building my biggest claim system out there, right? That's not going to happen. But what is absolutely going to happen is if you create an environment where these Fusion teams can thrive. So, Richard, you talked about the APIs.
Mm-hmm.
Can I take these underlying APIs? And first of all, API experience is critical. The APIs can be too complex. And can they be consumed by low-code tools and things like that?
Right.
That's a separate consideration. But let's say we create some aggregated APIs registered in some places where they are available for use. What if we made a data architect available? So you want to build this application, and here is a repository of all the data sets, and there can be literally hundreds of data sets if you are managing your repository. How do you make sense of these data sets? So if you start thinking about helping folks with what are the data sets available, what does it mean, what are the APIs available, how do you manage risks on the edges, right? Don't just call this API and call this API and cause this data leak, right? If you do these enabling things, so if the IT folks, rather than thinking of themselves as, hey, this is IT as a service, you tell us the requirements, here's the application, becomes an enabler to allow Fusion teams to function. And you're essentially creating an environment where you make these things, the APIs, the data sets, the risks, the security. If you make those as first-class citizens available to the Fusion teams, somebody would be able to open up something like Power Automate and write a business flow. So now you have these core systems. Of course, those are being worked on by professional technologists. But what if somebody wanted to create a new, let's say, new campaign, maybe a new policy type where you're aggregating some things, which is much closer to what the customers want. Now you take the Fusion team, take the underlying assets, create an application. You have far more agility in value creation this way than just using the traditional approaches.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you have a team that knows how to talk and communicate together, and you do one project, even if it's a sample, thing or a simple demo, then another challenge becomes so much easier because they've already got the process down.
Right.
Yeah.
And it does seem like the skill sets that are going to need to be built up, like building API. You said it kind of casually, but it's like building APIs that PowerApps can consume well.
Yeah.
You're going to bump into some things along the way on that, I suspect.
Even professional developers still disagree on how to construct an API.
Optimal APIs, yeah.
Endpoint, yeah.
What's the difference between Power Automate and PowerApps?
Yeah, so Power Platform is think of Power Platform as Microsoft's no-code, low-code platform. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of services on top of that. PowerApps is a way for you to create applications and, have different kinds of applications. You can have these, what they call model-driven applications, which are auto-generated based on the underlying Dataverse dataset. You can have Canvas applications, which is the closest thing that you think of. You drag and drop certain widgets, and now your app is available on multiple form factors. Yeah. That's PowerApps. Power Automate is the underlying technology is Azure Logic Apps.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Azure Logic
like
Apps
Azure Logic.
Exactly. You've worked with Azure Logic Apps is sort of more approachable by professional developers. Mm-hmm. So Logic App think of it as a syntactic sugar on top of Azure Logic Apps.
Nice.
But Power Automate is a way for you to express your business logic in form of a workflow.
Yeah.
And then Power Automate also includes the RPA components as well. So RPA. So you can, and I can see a smile on your face with RPA. We'll get to that in a second.
I'm just trying to be the acronym police, man.
Acronym police, man. That's our job.
I see. I thought robotic process automation, of course, but
okay.
I thought you had an opinion about RPA that, hey, we shouldn't be doing RPA.
I never even heard that one before.
Oh, you've not?
Well, and it's funny because it's an old term. What I'm actually smiling about is the fact that this old factory term is now living in information worker land.
It is such an important. It has become such an important term because when you asked about Power Automate, in Power Automate, you are visually expressing your business logic in a form of a workflow, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, call this web service or call this API. If the API is successful, then go down this path. If the API is not successful, go down the other path, right? Very simple. Right. It provides you a very visual way of creating your business process. But what if you don't have an API to the underlying system? Mm-hmm. And that is where robotic process automation comes into play, where you want to interact with this application, which has not been upgraded for 15 years, does not have a well-known API, but you still want to automate this part. And this application could be a web application, could be a Windows application.
Wow.
Well, you can record an interaction with your web or Windows application. That recording will be converted into a screen interaction. And now that interaction can be captured as part of your business process, essentially. Wow. That is what RPA is all about.
Okay.
And it is a multi-billion-dollar industry at this point.
Yes.
Because there's so much automation to be done, and not every product has an API surface available.
All right. So here's an example from the real world. A friend of mine gave me this thing right here, this USB card reader, right? And it's
like a magnetic stripe reader?
Magnetic stripe reader, but it writes and also reads. And it has a sample app that comes with it and a programmer's guide that's like, what? And I basically started capturing the data that the sample app is sending back and forth. And it's like multiple. Just when you start it up, there's like a conversation that happens. There's obviously a protocol. The commands are documented in the programming guide, but not the protocol. There's no guidance that says first you do this, then you get that, and you could do this. So, I basically struggled with it with a HID, human interface device library for a while and got nowhere. And then I finally said, you know what? I give up. This thing reads and writes the files. We're just going to read do a file system watcher, and that's how we're going to interact. So this is a good candidate for this type of thing. If I could just record an interaction with that, right? Yep. I just don't understand. It's a Windows app. Does it press the buttons? Does it?
Yeah, it does. It does. Under the covers, it is trying to figure out which elements of the Windows application are you trying to call. It is recording your keystrokes. And at this point, a lot of your listeners are thinking, "Oh no, this must be the most brittle application ever." Right. Because if I change the screen resolution, will this automation stop working? And this is why I said RPA has come a long way. Mm-hmm. If you record this interaction where you are not just depending on the screen coordinates, right? And image recognition comes into play.
Yeah.
If you are working with DOM elements, and you're not actually working with a screen resolution, you can make these kinds of interactions far more resilient. And that's what more advanced RPA implementations are doing today.
Wow.
So it's actually just capturing the Windows messages for a UI interaction. It doesn't care what the screen resolution is. It doesn't care what the mouse was doing or any of those things. What was the thing that was pushed? What was its handle?
You remember back in the 90s, there was CBT, computer-based training, and there was an API to do that and to capture keystrokes and to replay them back.
Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of what it reminds me of.
Yeah. There was an acquisition that Microsoft did where they got this technology. Of course, Microsoft had their own version when Power Automate first came out. But it has come a long way. And the reason this technology, even though for developers like all of us on this conversation, hey, API is the way to do that, right?
Sure.
You shouldn't be recording. Screen scraping is like bad. But once again, this shows you if you can automate something quickly, if you can show some real value by saving time, by automating this, and then in the process make it resilient, right?
Yeah.
Your Windows application may not be performing that well on a given day.
Mm-hmm.
When you recorded it, did you insert delays, or did you wait for a certain screen to load? I mean, these are the kinds of things that you have to do to make your
to tune it up, make it work well.
RPA resilient. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, you'd rather use the API if you can, but you don't have to build an API if there isn't one. There's a choice there.
That's right.
And Vishwas, I'm going to interrupt for one moment for this very important message. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey.
Talking to our friend Vishwas Lele a bit about his work with Fusion development teams. I mean, to me, the low-hanging fruit of using PowerApps is the cross-platform client play. That we're still struggling as UX developers to make something that works well, PC, tablet, phone. And that's kind of table stake for this class of apps when you use the PowerApps tools.
That's absolutely one of the biggest benefits that you don't have to worry about, and neither do you have to worry about all of the App Store submissions, right?
Right.
You're not only are you getting this multi-device, multi-form factor support. Once you publish this application, by virtue of PowerApps being on your phone, it's just something that you have access to.
Yeah. So the PowerApps client installs natively on all phone platforms, and then the app is just whatever metadata and code it needs to plug into that.
That's right. Just one layer of interaction.
That's nice.
Yeah, no, and you're also getting it, in theory, if you're doing this Fusion team model, you're getting it built by the folks who are going to use it. You get to put them into the drawer of broken dreams. It's like you're the fellow you were talking about that was playing with an iPad. You immediately want to hand him an iPhone and say, how does it work here? Or hand him a Pixel 6. How does it work here? Yep. Like you think about a little bit of education, a little bit of experience for that domain expert to just go, here's part of the problem we need with it. I'd like you to taste it at least and make part of your efforts just to that while you do this, evaluate these things, have a sense of how it's behaving. So don't worry about making it work on an Android tablet. Nobody uses those. Just, but definitely check it on an iPhone, check it on an Android phone, check it on an iPad, check it on a PC.
I use an Android tablet for a very specific purpose, which is as a teleprompter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I just have a Amazon Kindle Fire or something that I bought at Best Buy for $100, and it's perfect for that. It has a little tab, but I don't use it for everything. It's not my everything.
Yeah, it's not a multi-purpose device.
Vishwas, anytime that I talk to anybody about low code or no code solutions, I'm thinking back to the one that used Silverlight that Microsoft had for a long time. What was that?
Light Switch,
yeah. My first question is always, what are the gotchas? What can't I do? Where am I going to get stuck? Is it in accessing local devices? Is it particular third-party libraries that I'd like to use? Do we even use third-party libraries? These are the questions that I have.
Yeah. So the difference between something like Light Switch and Power Platform is, first of all, it's a platform, right? So it's not just one tool. And if you have a platform, you are able to provide a development model that just does not run up against some sort of a limitation and then you're done, right? You've just backed into some sort of a limitation. Mm-hmm. To give you an example, I was teaching a PowerApps class a few months ago, and this gentleman in the back, professional developer, said, "These widgets that you're dragging and dropping, they are great, but I don't want to use them." I want to display the NCAA bracket in the Power App, right? That's the Power App, and there is no widget that can display all the teams in the bracket and the scores and things like that, right? So it goes to your question, Carl, about what limitation. So there is no, there's a grid, and you can make by programming the grid in a certain way, maybe you can get the bracket experience, if you will. But there is a component, and this is why we call it Fusion Team Development, that maybe if you have 3 business technologists, and they can get to 80% of the application, but now they need this crazy control that can show these teams in a hierarchical manner, like the bracket.
Right.
Well, one of the professional developers can go off, and in fact, that's what I did. I couldn't code it up in that class, but I did talk to him afterwards. Go ahead and build a control, and there is an extensibility model in PowerApps where they allow you to inject a custom control that a professional technologist may have written.
Okay.
Right? And do so in a manner where you're not just getting an iframe, right? You are actually part of the DOM, right? So you write this control, maybe Angular or React or something. You write this control, you package it up, you provide the metadata. You have to, as you're implementing this control, you implement certain methods, and the Power Platform is sort of calling you on those methods and injecting you in as they're rendering that. Right?
I see.
So you're part of the DOM that's being rendered there. Right?
So you're building a control the same way that Microsoft built their controls.
That's right.
That are the default set inside of PowerApps. So it's not a side case. It's the normal workflow.
Right.
Now, if you want native code for different platforms, can you specify that in each, with some kind of metadata or whatever?
So I don't think that's a good question. So you're saying when you write these controls, can those be in native code?
Right. Because I'm getting that it's HTML based, right?
It's HTML based. At the end of the day, it's HTML based. So you're writing these controls in Angular.
Or Blazor, for that matter.
Or Blazor, for that matter.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you're writing it in that manner. Maybe you're using a third-party control there, right?
Yeah.
But by virtue of implementing the interface of PCF control, you're able to inject that control as the page or screen is being rendered.
Right. So in Maui, for example, we can use the Blazor UI subsystem component model, and yet the host environment is not a web environment. It's a native environment. And so we have access to all of the native accessibility, right? Like compasses and gyroscopes and the camera and all of those things. And I'm wondering how a Power App is going to be able to access those, if it's going to be able to access those, or is that not within the scope of what a Power App is?
So Power Apps gives you access to the camera and controls and things like that, just through the Power Platform interface, right? There are these context objects that are available to you.
Okay.
And you can say contextObject.camera or contextObject.microphone or something like that. They give you access to that.
That's great. That's really good news.
Suddenly it feels like, is this phone gap?
Well, it's a hybrid model, right?
Yeah. That one app you install that everything runs from is effectively providing interfaces to the devices.
Yeah.
As a set of libraries. So that reminds me of PhoneNet Gap back in the day.
Sure. And Maui now.
Yep.
I mean, it's the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, Richard. Some of these patterns that they've used have been around for some time. And I go back to my point that it's not just one tool. It's not your ability to inject a control. But let's just talk about how do you express logic. Right?
Sure.
So I bring a widget. Somebody was nice enough to write this advanced control in Angular and then gave it to me, packaged it up, write metadata so I can pass into that control parameters and things like that. That's all great. But now I've created an application that has to interact with these controls. How do I express the logic? And Power Apps has taken the approach of let's meet where our users are. So they use a language called PowerFX, and you'll probably be surprised. Hey, why does a low-code platform need a new language, right? PowerFX is the new language that they use, which is very Excel-like. It's a functional programming language. You don't have to worry about every call that you make to a camera control or to something else is an asynchronous call, but you're not worried about all of the callbacks, which is not a problem for professional developers, but you cannot expose those kind of unintended consequences. Hey, you call this and this happened to a business technologist, right? So there is a strong overlap between what PowerFX gives you and what Excel has. What I have not checked lately.
Maybe
so
VBA.
Here, but
it looks kind of like VBA,
Not VBA. I'm not talking about VBA. VBA is sort of is a tool that can. I'm just talking about pure Excel formulas.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
And if I had, based on when I looked at it last, there's about 400 or so formulas that are available inside Excel. Yeah. Right. And if there was a Uber language that business technologists used, I don't think we would be wrong in saying that Excel formulas is something that they all know about.
Oh, yeah. Huge.
Yeah.
So being able to take that language, and there's an overlap. I don't think they have quite 400 formulas in PowerFX, the same as Excel, because Excel team is adding new formulas as well.
Sure.
But idea is you are essentially, and I've walked many business technologists through this, right? In an Excel spreadsheet, you're dealing with cells, right? Leave VBA aside for a moment because, that complicates matters, and VBA has sort of downsides about, error handling and all of that, right? Yeah. So leave VBA aside for a second. Just formulas, right? When you talk about formulas, there are no variables in Excel. You tie a formula to a cell, and any time that cell changes, like it's tied to another cell, the value changes, that is reflected onto to the formula where the cell that the formula is
action driven, really.
UI action driven. So PowerFX is a language which does exactly the same thing, except rather than working with the cells, think of a text box, a label, or another control as being orchestrated through an Excel-like language, right? So,
well, and you think about these domain experts you're working with, what a sensible way to provide some programmability. Sure. They'll already relate to it.
Yes. So I think that's why I keep going back, because I've in this journey I've asked this question of myself. Hey, are we going down the path of SharePoint Designer, which was some of your listeners will chuckle at that, or hey, I want to create a workflow. Shudder. I can just create in SharePoint Designer or Visio or something like that. Yeah. But they were one-off tools and sort of not a whole ecosystem where you do some things. And then you can bring in a professional technologist to absorb output and then expand it and extend it, right? And that's all part of it. But you cannot ignore IT department's willingness to embrace this. And you might think that, the IT folks who are sort of embracing this fusion model, you might think that, they're giving up power, right? They are now people from outside the company who don't report to them are now building applications. So, in some ways I'm giving up power, right? I don't have control over all the software being delivered in my organization. But I think it's quite the contrary. If you think of yourself as an enabler of technology which allows these fusion teams to come in and build applications, you're creating more value for the organization. And now your value in the organization is not just, hey, go manage the network, storage, and compute.
Right.
You are now very much front and center part in the business discussion.
Sure.
And if you start doing that, you get this network effect going, which can bring greater value. So that's why a platform is very important.
Yeah.
Well, this is the old, I'm a programmer. I'm not employed to write code. I'm employed to provide business value solutions to my customers. Yeah. And there's a bunch of ways to do that. Some of it involves code. Some of it even just involves enough understanding of code to know where code's not needed, or there's simpler ways to solve those problems.
Yeah. Wow, it's very interesting. Very exciting. This is stuff. Like the first time I've really dove into PowerApps with somebody who's a developer, right? I mean, to be able to ask the questions of you and have you give me the analogies is really, really how I understand things.
And Carl, if I could just give you one other example. So you write an Excel-like formula. So PowerApps, you drag and drop. Let's just walk through the process, right? You click open a PowerApps, you drag and drop some widgets. Then you have to get data from somewhere. And of course, you can go get the data from Dataverse, or you can get it from SQL, what have you. You can get it from any data source you want. They support hundreds of connectors. And now you want to, let's say, filter the data on some expression of something, right? And you have no idea that you're opening a connection, you're writing the SQL statement, you have no idea. You write an Excel-like formula which says, get me this data and, some sort of a formula-based expression to filter the data. And under the covers, what PowerApps is doing is saying, you're running on a constrained device. You don't need to bring all of these 500 records down to this client. Okay. Unbeknownst to you, let me just delegate this, this filtering operation or the sorting operation. Let me just delegate this off to the server side. Let me convert that into a SQL statement that will run on the server side. That will bring limited data back on the client side. So it can run on a constrained device.
And automatically virtualize it. Yeah, that's really good.
Things like that can happen. You're still using a formula, but nobody told you that this was an asynchronous call.
Yeah.
And you were doing this operation on the server side and only getting small amount of data back. And the other interesting thing is you already told me that you're bringing this data and you're binding it to these 4 columns in the grid. So when I do a select statement that I'm generating on your behalf, I'm just only going to bring those columns for you.
Yeah.
So if this is what makes people who have business focus, have some interest in programming, can think, have a computational thinking. And I like to say this, use this fancy term. You don't need to be a programmer to have a computational thinking. You just have to know how computers work and how you express logic.
Sure.
And you take a language which does not have unintended consequences.
Sure.
And then the final thing is, you're not asking them to learn some new syntax. Hey, by the way, just put a semicolon after this. No. So they know Excel. You just are taking advantage of their skill set.
Well, the moment you say Excel, I think about how many companies have business critical spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And that should be apps.
Yeah.
They started out as an experiment. They were just gathering some data, doing some munging, but it helped make decisions. And suddenly that spreadsheet becomes a vital decision-making tool, and it gets more complicated and more complicated. And the biggest problem I find with most of those advanced Excel spreadsheets is you can't tell when they're broken. You can't tell when they're not collecting all of the data. They're
giving you a number, no matter what.
They dropped a bunch of rows at the bottom and so forth. I did a show over on RunAs at the end of last year with a lovely lady by the name of Jennifer Stirrup, who's a data analytics type. And that we called the show Getting Rid of Excel. But it was, straight up clickbait, I admit it. And by the way, worked fabulously, right?
Sure.
This one, I think, was passed around to upset people.
Yeah.
But it was a conversation about how these spreadsheets become too powerful. And that serious mistakes have been made. In the show, we talked about the case studies of exactly that. They didn't grab all the rows. They left off a whole chunk of data. There were mistakes made in England around COVID response because of mistakes like that in spreadsheets. So I think it's part of our responsibility as the automators in organizations that this evaluating of these heavy duty spreadsheets and saying, hey, maybe this should be better served as an app, a little safer, a little more reliable. But don't worry, we're not going to throw away your work. Most of your work is going to show up as a Power App with some automate and this great PowerFX language, which you'll recognize because a fair number of your expressions are going to be able to be placed right in there. So that person then would be part of making that that spreadsheet into something even more valuable to the organization.
I have a complaint though, Vishwas. I'm looking at the documentation file called Introducing Microsoft PowerFX, the low-code programming language for everyone. And the example is in YAML. WTF, man. YAML.
What you're looking at is, they have also open sourced that language. Right?
Oh, wow.
So what their goal is, and I have a recommendation to make. I'll do that after the show. You should bring the architect of this language, Greg, a great authority on this topic. Certainly can speak much better than I can. But they've taken the PowerFX language and they've open sourced it. Why? Because they want this kind of a language embedded in other tools. So what you're seeing, the documentation that you're seeing, is for professional developers to incorporate this language into a tool of their choice.
Oh, okay.
So
nobody's going to be writing YAML.
Nobody's going to be writing YAML. No. They're not the least from a...
I just wonder why, an introduction to PowerFX has that as the second screenshot. That's just...
So they are definitely trying to open source. They have open sourced the language. And there's a NuGet package that you can get where you can bring that into your C# project if you wanted to, and sort of use it in that manner as well. So part of the documentation, but I can assure you that, if you're a business technologist using PowerFX, you will not see YAML.
So this is an alternative to VBA.
I'm a professional developer and I don't even like YAML. I hate it. It makes my skin crawl.
But this is an alternative to VBA then. This is an approach to automation, approach to macro style programming that's right. Could go anywhere.
Yeah, it's object.property equals value, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And, YAML.
Be damned.
I gotta live with some YAML. I just, what? White space is your friend. you know how you hate YAML less? Visual Studio Code.
Yeah.
That's right.
The tooling that helps you fight the white space insanity.
Good.
But
even Visual Studio now has white space visualizers.
Yeah.
I like it.
That's, the interesting thing about those kinds of problems is we can, battle them with tooling. And it's interesting to me to think about, if I had an opportunity to be, an enterprise architect again, cultivating a practice within my organization. Like now I'm starting to see all these pieces in the way you've described them, Vishwas. Is like, I need to add this to my professional development practice for these domain experts, for these business technologists, that as we, how many times that super spreadsheet has been discovered, built by a particular person, and now it's a crisis, like they've created a problem rather than what it really is, which is a success. You have created business value and we need to preserve it.
Yeah.
We need to protect it. It needs to be part of the infrastructure of this company, not just a spreadsheet on your workstation. Right? That you give a language to that celebration, and then you want them to be involved. And there's some things you're going to need to learn, but believe me, you're going to have a great time. Like, it's an awesome way to work.
I like it, man. It's good. I finally understand it. I mean, we've been talking to people about PowerApps for a while now, a couple of years, and this is the first time I actually get it.
Did it again, Vishwas. You brought this to reality for us.
Thank you. What's next for you, man? What's in your inbox? What's on your to-do list?
What's in my inbox? So that's a great question. I've been, as you know, been working on Azure for 10 years or 12 years or more. And, I took a step back and the organizations that we have helped adoption of Azure and things like that. And if you take a look at those, a lot of Azure adoption has been around IT modernization, right? Hey, I need a more resilient infrastructure. I need to only pay for what I use, and I need failover scenarios and disaster recovery, and I want to manage less, and I want somebody else to manage it. Those are all great things, but at the end of the day, they are still sort of about modernizing your IT stack. And what's in my inbox is we've had the cloud for 10, 12, 13 years, whatever. We've only begun to to make inroads into changing the companies, the way they function, right? The promise of the cloud always is that, hey, you can do digital innovation. You can release new products faster. You can do innovation. But you've still been, what we've been able to do, I mean, there are some examples, of course, where you've done digital innovation. But those examples, the large projects have been really IT modernization. So the way and I've been thinking a lot about how do you sort of leapfrog and try to have an impact in front of the customers, right? And sort of taking the Fusion team approach, still, depending on all of the advancements that have happened in Azure, API and software network, software-defined networks and storage, all of that. But then bringing the business community to start building these applications. As these two things come together, from the top, low-code, no-code business technologist, from the bottom, a much more resilient, robust platform as a service capability. If you're able to combine the two together, I think the next few years, we have a chance of bringing the real value of the cloud to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
If they don't get to the platform pieces, they don't get to really enjoy the cloud. But that leap from lift and shifted VMs into really using the platforms, and still not a simple leap.
All right, Vishwas.
It's a great area of exploration.
All right, Vishwas, thanks very much for spending this hour with us, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a